Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Yulia Gilic, and I'm with the Institute for the Critical Study of Zionism. We are delighted to host today's event with Brendan Harris, who is an assistant professor at the University of Alabama's Department of Journalism and Creative Media. And he will talk about political discourse and cycles of antagonism on Twitch. And before I give the floor to our speaker, I want to situate this conversation within the work of the Institute, and I will put some links in the chat once I'm done speaking. So Institute for the Critical Study of Zionism is a research community that builds and defends the field of critical Zionism studies. And our goal is to produce knowledge, develop strategy, and share resources that are timely and that benefit Palestinian and collective liberation. And to that end, we produce a podcast that's called Unpacking Zionism, a journal for the critical study of Zionism. We organize events, conferences, and workshops. We are launching a writing fellowship. We have multiple research and study groups. And for the past few months, we have been working on a project of studying smear, be it in the form of hate mail, social media campaigns, public smears, etc. And this project takes Zionist smear seriously, and it understands it as a weapon and ideology, and takes smear as an object of study that we need to understand in order to effectively resist it. So on the page that I will share with you all in the chat, you will find resources, recordings of previous conversations, and other materials that situate and theorize Zionist smear. So today's event is part of that series, and it looks at how Zionist smear operates on the streaming platform Twitch. So on this note, I'm going to give the floor to our speaker, Brendan Harris, and after his presentation, we will transition into a Q&A portion, which I will facilitate. So please type your question in the chat, and we'll try to get to them in due time. Brendan, thanks so much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Awesome, thank you so much. Let me share my screen. I can't do that without talking. All right, that's slideshow now, right? Wonderful. All right, well, hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here and to kind of have this conversation with all of you. My name is Dr. Brandon Harris. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Alabama. And so this is my research on political discourse and cycles of antagonism on Twitch, combating anti-Semitism in the creator economy. And so before we dive too deeply into online research, who am I? What is my work about? I'm interested in a broad array of topics. And so this model kind of neatly models some of that, right? So I'm really interested in labor and cultural production, which has led me to focusing on the workers and content creators who are doing this type of work, who are transforming these media industries. I'm interested in how this bleeds over into and creates new genres of content. And so how is it that we have Twitch streamers who are typically known for games and esports who are suddenly acting as journalists, and what kind of chaos or transformations or benefits potentially does that add or complicate to our existing media industries? And so naturally, all of this takes place on and off of platforms. And so all of these aspects are quite prominent in the work that I do. And so I approach these pretty open-mindedly from a lot of different backgrounds. And so we can start this off with, a traditional question of, where did you get your legacy or long form news from? For news journalism on television, online, and on radio and in print media, these have traditionally relied on subscription or advertising revenues in order to pay their bills and, to turn a profit. This has led to interesting differences between publications. And so this can cause different ideological biases depending on which channel you're watching and for which region in the world you are watching. Um, the most official news station depends on where you are in the world as much as what you personally believe in, as well as the languages that you speak. However, this doesn't necessarily describe our reality in which most people, especially young people like millennials, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha, are getting their news who prefer to consume news on social media. And so now that social media platforms and other websites are more popular and acceptable venues for news production and consumption, this landscape has fragmented even further. Different platforms attract different types of audiences according to interests, demographics, region in the world, as well as ideologies. The rules and policies that these platforms enact directly shape what kind of journalism or political discourse is allowed on that platform. For example, when it was Twitter, the microblogging platform used to ban neo-Nazis and white supremacists to attempt to curb naked hate speech on the platform. However, since Musk's acquisition, X has become much more comfortable with these discourses and has unbanned many who were previously removed for violating hate speech. What makes news production on social media then so dangerous or potentially dangerous is that anyone with the followers or the clout can be positioned as an authority figure on these conversations. As long as you have enough followers, if you can get thousands of likes on your posts consistently, that puts you on the same level of expertise and authority as most verified journalists. And now some might think, journalism in the United States famously does not require licensing or a certificate, right? And that's one of the First Amendment tenets that, right to the free press. And that's good. Well, that is good in principle. But in these traditional landscapes, in this inner circle, right, with the Fox News, the CNN, and the MSNBC, journalists, political commentators, and pundits are still going through a journalism program typically in their degree. So they typically have some education about this. They have working understandings of a shared code of ethics between most publications. And so there are some institutions and cultures that will try to keep everything on the up and up, for lack of a better word, or keep everyone playing by the same rules. Whereas on social media, that dynamic does not exist. If you can get the followers, then you are the news authority, and that's just the way that it works. There is no shared code of ethics on how to be a responsible news commentator online. And so we finally come to Twitch at this point. And so I'm going to assume that most of you are unfamiliar, and that is totally fine. But if you go onto Twitch, you are bombarded with these thumbnails, right? And so each of these thumbnails is a preview of a different channel. These are all individual streamers. They're all having conversations with their own communities, right? So all of these are happening in real time. There is no, so when you go to search, right, the category on Twitch, right? Typically the category is organized by a video game that you're interested in. So if you want to play League of Legends or watch people playing that, that is its own category. However, there is no category for news or journalism, right? And so all of these people who are doing news work or content creation or political commentary are lumped together in this kind of catch-all category known as just chatting. Just chatting can be quite a few things. It tends to include these commentators and news producers. But for Twitch, which is so heavily associated with gaming and online communities, you might not be interested in, U.S. geopolitical news on that day, right? You might be interested in news about the Pokemon card community, right? You might be interested in rare sneakers or something like that. And so our definition of news and journalism typically is limited to, facts about politics or elections or policies or neighborhoods, right? Whereas on Twitch, this is really extended and can be quite broad, right? It could be your news about your favorite podcast. It could be news about your favorite streamer or drama channel. So there's quite a large variety. That being said, the two who are the most popular on Twitch, you can kind of see them. I don't know if you can see my mouse moving, but it's in this top left and second top left panel. And so that is that RAR, or better known as Asmongold, and that is Hasanabi. These are the two most popular political streamers on the channel right now. On Asmongold, you can see that he's got 52.1 thousand followers who are watching him live at that moment of the screenshot. Whereas on Hassan's thumbnail, you can see that he's got 37.9 thousand followers watching him at that moment of the screenshot as well. So the viewership is quite large, right? I think a lot of local TV stations would be excited about having this many live concurrent viewers on any given moment. So the scale and popularity of these streamers, especially at the top end, is really high. And these are just the people who are currently available at this time, right? Both Asmongold and Hassan have millions of followers on the platform, and their audience far outranks what they might be able to muster together at that particular time, because live streaming does require you to be able to actually, I mean, it's kind of like the Zoom call, right? If you're not available to participate on the meeting, you're not going to be able to see it. So there is a larger audience there. And then finally, you can see that both Hassan and Asmongold here are watching something with President Donald Trump. It looks like they might be watching different news channels of the same speech. But this is a thumbnail that's kind of showing what this typically looks like. So if you're watching news on Twitch, you are typically watching a streamer who is doing something. They're going to pull up a bunch of videos from different news outlets, whether they're watching and signed in directly or watching them on YouTube. And they will just talk about and react to the most newsworthy stories of the day. And that's just kind of how this goes on. And so as news stories roll in throughout the day, they continuously have new things to talk about. And so there's a never-ending supply of topics for them to insert their commentary over. And so this led to our first article that we wrote on news production on Twitch. And so this is about Twitch and journalism. And we were very curious about which models, so which business models flourish and which styles of news are considered the most popular. And so we were just curious about who was doing this. This was started before COVID-19 lockdown, so the landscape has evolved tremendously. I think we started this in like 2019 or something, and then you can see that it was finally published in 2024. Perseverance is everything. But this was about, we basically compared three different news channels. We started with the Washington Post because that was the only legacy news outlet that was currently operating on the platform. And so we kind of compared what they were doing to what Hassan Piker was doing. And so he kind of served as our ideologically progressive and leftist perspective, but also he was the only one that followed a social media influencer business model in which he was establishing a fan community, in which he was trying to turn those relationships with his audience into more celebrity and personal enrichment for himself. Whereas Patriot's Soapbox was a pro-QAnon, community-driven and organized news channel that more closely resembled a podcast or even a radio call-in show. And so we wanted to explore how all three of these people were doing things. What are the aesthetics? What are the talking points? How are they organizing these broadcasts? What are some of the hurdles? One of the things that we've noticed, because Patriot Soapbox is no longer allowed on Twitch, they were permanently banned. Mostly because, and it's not a limit of free speech necessarily, but that many of the things that are the most popular talking points with the QAnon community at the time, whether that be, the claim of Jewish space lasers or vaccine misinformation or vaccines causing autism, those were viewed, especially during 2020 COVID lockdowns, as, dangerous, and they violated the terms of conduct. And so these were considered bannable offenses. And so we have this how political issues, which are actually news, can be and will be censored by platforms depending on what is currently permissible and acceptable and popular at the time. And so this led us into a follow-up article because we noticed that this is a very rich and unique thing that is happening, right? What does it mean when a streamer is inserting themselves into the news and when that personality becomes a driving component? As someone who took a lot of journalism history classes, right, you hear about how historically Walter Cronkite was praised as this bastion of journalism in the US who was unobjective, who was always neutral, right? And one of the most trusted men in the United States at the time. And now we see, okay, so maybe that, but if you look at the viewership data for someone like Hassan, right, these audiences are similar. I don't know if you have the same cultural impact, but what does it mean when this news gets merged with these celebrity personalities as well? What does it mean when Twitch streamers are arguing with their rivals on Twitter and other platforms, right? How are they commanding their live audiences that are watching synchronously with their asynchronous audiences who might be busy working or going to school or doing other tasks throughout the day, right? And so how does all of this work together? And once again, we found ourselves studying Hassan, but we found it very interesting that this one person who has less Twitter followers than, you know, all of these people on this slide, but he could frequently and strategically call out to his followers like, hey, we are going to ratio this person on Twitter, whether that be Ben Shapiro or Steven Crowder, the rivaling content creators, or whether that is elected officials like Ted Cruz, or whether that is even celebrities like Nicki Minaj. And so that's something that we were very interested in, and that led us to this concept called cycles of antagonism. And so basically a cycle of antagonism, right? Because if you are broadcasting or if you're a streamer, you are talking into the void with your audience for 8 to 12 hours a day, 5 to 7 days a week, basically, right? Especially if you are a content creator, the news does not stop. You are constantly going to be going live and creating new content, right? And so if you are covering the news and then you insert these antagonistic skirmishes with rivals into that mix, right? That is a new layer to news development. We typically do not see these type of personality clashes in the news, but when creators insert themselves into this, right, whether it's Ben Shapiro and Hassan arguing with each other, right, you are responding to each other in different modalities and on different platforms. Because when you are live streaming on Twitch, right, you are locked into your chair and your computer, and there's really not a lot of other things you can do other than continuing to be on your computer, right? And so you are not having a live conversation with a person that might be to your left or to your right where you're facing them. You are continuing to look at a screen, which allows you to manipulate different modalities, which allows you to respond to different platforms, right? So even though so if Ben Shapiro makes a YouTube video about Hassan saying that he's the worst socialist in the world and that he's going to be, I don't know, that socialism is bad, then Hassan will typically watch that video with his audience and then formulate his response in real time. So you are brought into these antagonistic skirmishes. This also allows for different opportunities for audiences to get involved, right? Because as audiences spend more time with these content creators and streamers, they start to develop parasocial relationships or feelings of affinity, whether it's, you know, whether you're just a fan of someone, whether you believe everything they're saying, whether you are a super fan. These people can be brought into these types of skirmishes as well. And so we have a model for that we kind of called the asynchronous interactions with chat. And so this puts the streamer at the center. And then as they are responding to things, right? So if we have Hassan in the middle, and if we're watching a video where Asmongold is saying that we're evil, right? We can make an initial call to action to our live audience. And so that can be, hey, go like this tweet because I want to go ratio this person. I want to deny them visibility on Twitter so we can reframe this story in a way that is positive to us or highlights, things that might be more accurate in our opinion. Or it can be, calling publicity to donation, right? Or fundraiser event, right? The call to action can be, the call to action varies depending on what the cause is. But it's typically some kind of minor action which involves liking or commenting or sharing. So it's usually pretty easy to get involved, which makes these strategies more popular. However, when most of these strategies are taking place on a social media platform that prioritizes visibility, this becomes increasingly powerful, right? Because if Hassan has 40,000 people watching him any afternoon, right? And if he can get 1,000 of them to go like his tweet the minute that it goes up, that's going to set that tweet up for additional visibility for longer than if he had just tweeted that out on his own. So having that boost in initial visibility is extremely powerful for content creators who are really struggling to remain visible at any cost. And so this initial visibility provides that initial momentum. And then because they have millions of fans, most of which are asynchronous, right? They might see that initial bit of momentum and then add to that. So that way it continues to snowball and become more visible throughout the day. And I'm gonna take a sip real quick. Um, so everyone can yell at each other. Everyone can surveil each other. Everyone has legions of fan communities who can be activated for liking and commenting and sharing, right? Which can easily be turned into a harassment campaign. And so all of this is built on a platform that is historically associated with gaming and esports, right? For those of you who might not be as familiar with gaming and esports, they are known to be misogynistic. The companies that make games, especially in the 2000s and 2010s, were wrought with sexual harassment. I don't know if anyone remembers for Blizzard Activision, there was a massive lawsuit there where developers were being suspended for having sexual misconduct cases against them. And so the developers making the games are misogynistic. The gamers who play these games do harassment campaigns, such as in 2014 when people harassed a games journalist in what was now called Gamergate. And so Twitch is built on top of a toxic techno culture to begin with, right? It has a strong history with harassment campaigns. In 2021, there was a Twitch Do Better campaign where streamers threatened a platform-wide boycott to stop streaming until Twitch took more action to prevent people from performing these hate raids that are typically involve a bunch of people coming into your chat room and spamming slurs or things to try to violate terms of service to get the streamer in trouble. And this harassment specifically is targeted at women, people of color, and other historically marginalized communities, right? And so this makes Twitch streaming content creation is already a precarious labor. You have no safety nets, you have no health insurance. There are very few benefits outside of just you making money from ad share. And so on top of all of that, you add this very likely occurrence of harassment. On top of that, Twitch is inconsistent with how they enforce their content governance and policies. And they also rely on context, right? Because if everyone is live streaming for 8 to 12 hours a day, 5 to 7 days a week, there is too much stuff for you to moderate, right? And so they are extremely reliant on tools that allow audiences to record streamers. And so they call that a clip, where you can record a short video clip from a streamer's channel, and then you can share that video later. And so this has become a common tool in harassment campaigns in which people will use the 30-second clip where you might be at your most aggravated, right? Or at your, maybe you've been streaming for 8 hours at this point talking about something, and they found a 30-second clip where you kind of hit your limit or you're at your most frustrated, right? But that 30-second clip ignores the entire 8 to 10 hours where you were being a reasonable person, and it only highlights that one bad thing or potentially controversial thing. And so these context-based governances make it really difficult for content creators as well, right? If you're having a conversation about sensitive topics in politics, where people frequently disagree with each other and they have passionate and heated conversations, right, where they care a lot, as they should, that does not lend itself very well to an environment where, people can use a 30-second clip out of context to try to get you punished. And then finally, there is no consensus on what news perspectives or ideologies are allowed. News is kind of like pornography, and where there is a very ambiguous definition where people tend to rely on things like you will know it when you see it. And so that does not necessarily help for these conversations, right? What becomes news versus lived experiences for some can be quite contentious. And so there are a lot of different examples where these become difficult, right? And so there have been boycotts because Twitch has banned specific hate speech phrases, which is typically a good thing, right? We don't like racial slurs. That typically leads to an unsafe environment. I can't think of a good reason to allow those types of terms, right? But what happens when you ban a phrase like Zionism from being used, right? What happens when you add that to the list of conversations that you cannot say, right? What happens when the ADL starts pressuring Twitch staff to try to implement more content moderation and governance, right? And so we're seeing that these tools that were already fraught and fragile to begin with are really coming under attack and being weaponized by different users to different causes, right? And it can be very difficult for people to navigate. And so the case study that we are specifically going to be focusing on today took place at TwitchCon 2024, specifically September 20th through the 22nd. Now, as you can imagine, the Arab population of streamers is not as popular, right? Most of the popular streamers on the platform tend to be straight white men, dude bros. And so those who are advocating and normalizing different viewpoints, cultures, and perspectives tend to have much smaller audiences. But because Twitch is legally required to pursue more profits, right? It is an Amazon subsidiary, right? So it does have to make a profit. So it does claim that it wants new streamers and new diverse viewpoints. And so for these annual conventions, they allow people to host panels like you would at a conference, right? To kind of highlight how accessible and how diverse and inclusive the community is. So Twitch allowed this group, specifically the Arabs podcast, which consists of Frodan and Raful Ticket. They organized a panel dedicated to highlight streamers of Arabic heritage. Specifically, this podcast, right, they make a point to highlight that Frogan identifies as a Muslim Arab, and she's typically in a hijab when she is streaming. And Raful Ticket, who identifies as a Jewish Arab, right? And so this podcast is supposed to be talking about a broad array of Arabic experiences that isn't necessarily limited to one country or one religion, right? They're just speaking about this broadly as a culture or an identity, which led them to have a panel because at 2024 there was a popular meme format where people were making what they call tier lists, which you can see at the bottom, where they rank things in terms of good to bad. And so Twitch approved the panel where guests basically use a tier list with Arab at the top and loves Sabra at the bottom, right? And so they were seeing who gets to use the Habibi word. And so this is a tongue-in-cheek, rather playful experience overall. And we'll play a video clip on this, but this is what it looked like, right? So what happened? Why is everybody mad? So you can see Arab coded, asks sperms, thinks it's a slur, and loves Sabra. Now, might not be the best idea to rank people in a list like this, right? We can probably agree this is, oh, yeah, you might cause some controversy here, but I don't know if this is necessarily something that would cause more than, okay, that's a little spicy, but I will play the clip and you can just decide for yourself.
The next person to learn is theater people. Keep in mind.
That's what you guys are done.
This is a good reaction.
That was a good one. That's good. All right. Turn that. Turn.
You're missing categories or something. Hey, Joe, that was just a joke in my.
Well, I'm gonna need to love Sabra, right?
Yeah.
Definitely love Sabra. All right, so there he goes.
Brenda, I'm so sorry. The video
All right, so
cut out for a second. Could you retell
no.
the gist of the controversy? The sound went in and
Yes.
out.
Okay. So, oh, that's a bummer. But basically, you see these five beautiful streamers sitting on stage. They're participating. They have already ranked a couple of people as, you know, Arab, as they get to use the Habibi word, right? And then they get to a picture of Ethan Klein, who is controversial. We will go over this in a couple slides, right? But he's ideologically more aligned with Israel, right? His wife, Hila, was a member of the IDF, and so they are very vocal supporters of the IDF and Zionism more broadly. And so during this event, the streamers, they start to laugh, right? And one suggests that, you know, should we have a category for Zionists? So that is the technical, like that is the moment where someone technically used the word Zionist as a derogatory term that eventually led to more content moderation from Twitch down the line. You can also see there on a panel that is sponsored. So you can see that TwitchCon itself is sponsored by Capcom, Chevron, and Samsung. So these are pretty big brands that become potential targets for people to notify and almost tattle on.
The next.
We'll go to the next slide though. And so that happened in September of 2024. And then October 17th, Ethan Klein posted a video saying Twitch has a major problem. Basically outlining that Twitch has a broader pattern of anti-Semitism on the platform. He mentioned Hassan Piker as someone who was allegedly platforming terrorist Houthis and terrorist propaganda. And basically, he called out this event because, you know, they made fun of him, right? This is a person who is known to be more comfortable in defending Israel online and in the content creation space. They have gotten into multiple arguments with various Arab creators and those who support Palestine since October 2023. And so this is kind of the culmination of an already year-long feud, right? Where Ethan Klein has decided, like, okay, this is enough. I'm going to do something about this, and I'm going to decide to call and complain about the entire platform. And so this escalated, right? So on October 17th is the initial Twitch has a problem. But then on his podcast 4 days later, he escalates things into saying that the CEO, Dan Clancy, must resign as Twitch. demonstrating that not only is he taking this seriously, but he expects results, right? I don't know too many people who have the ability to just call a company and say your CEO needs to resign, right? That's typically not how CEOs resign. Like typically they have to do like financial fraud and get found guilty in a court of law. We don't just allow individuals to make that decision. And so what does this do? This starts off harassment campaigns, right? Because as Ethan Klein, he starts it off, he says, this is the problem, Frogan is a problem, Hassan's a problem, everyone on that panel is a problem, this is anti-Semitic. They linked because Sabra Hummus is owned by an Israeli company. And so as people were talking about the BDS movement, you know, he linked that, he tried to make that connection between what they were doing. Even though from Frogan's perspective is that, hey, as someone who is Arab, we tend to believe that Sabra is not good hummus. And so if we're making a joke about how, you know, who's going to get invited to an Arab hosted meal or cookout, that is the punchline. And so she says, you know, Ethan Klein lied again and said myself, Arab, and our guest did a tier list where good equals Arab and Jew equals bad, which isn't what happened. Let's see, this menu's in the way, sorry. Our tier list was who has the BD pass, which is a meme tier list we did with a variety of creators. Here's the clip with the context. The whole basis of my podcast, Arab with Capri and Raf, is that we are all Arabs from different religious backgrounds. I am Muslim, Capri is Christian, and Raf is Jewish. Sabra hummus is objectively the worst hummus to exist and is the unfortunate standard of hummus in the US, right? And so she's not really making this, well, I guess they did make it about Zionism, right? Because one of the panelists did say he should be labeled as one. So I guess they got him there. But this response is largely ignored, right? Ignored. She does not have millions of followers. She does not have millions of dollars. And so this highlights contextual governance, right? Because if you do not have the clip, right? So if Ethan Klein is the only one who recorded this event, and if he recorded 20 seconds, and that's the only clip that exists of your event, that is the context that will determine the decision. Whereas if you have a recording that competes with it, right, that adds this extra 16 seconds or an extra minute to that rounds out that context, that is how you defend yourself at this point, right? So they have to just constantly record everything in order to potentially defend themselves. This leads to inconsistent enforcement of rules, but it also demonstrates that streamers are left to fend for themselves and that they are responsible for their own safety, whether it's recording their own clips to provide evidence of what actually happened, or whether it is advocating for themselves when they're the victims of harassment campaigns. And so just to get a look at how many followers each of these people have, right? You have the 5 streamers who were on this Arab Twitch streamer panel. Denims is the most popular one on Twitch. She has 115,000 on Twitch. Vio 57.9 thousand. Raffle has 5.2 thousand, right? So very small following. Whereas Ethan Klein, who is primarily known as a YouTuber, not a Twitch streamer, has 585,000 on Twitch, right? On Twitter, he has 2 million. On YouTube, 2.68 million, right? So the reach that he has is significantly different, or significantly disproportionate to the others. So he's quite literally punching down at people. And so on October 22nd, so the same day that Ethan Klein did his live stream demanding that Dan Clancy resign as CEO, all 5 of these streamers who participated on the panel received a 30-day ban, excuse me, the full month ban. And now when a streamer is reported, they don't exactly tell you why you were reported. Twitch claims that it's company policy not to reveal what happened. You know, it's legal, avoiding responsibility. So people largely speculate, right? Which puts even more importance on these clips for contextual governance, because if you don't have the clip, you don't know what they did. That's causing the controversy. And so you get these fan accounts like streamer bans that will just automatically scroll and look to see who's been banned. And so one of these streamers referred to as Wrath or Raffle Ticket literally didn't even have enough followers to be registered on this automatic tool, right? That reports on when a verified streamer has been banned or not. So really punching down at small fish, right? And trying to get these perspectives and voices removed from the platform. Now this led to, and again, on the 21st, the Anti-Defamation League was directly involved. And so they said we spoke with the Twitch staff today after becoming aware of several concerning incidents on the social media platform and or involving Twitch streamers in the past week. We appreciate Twitch for making the right decision to finally suspend the streamer Frogan for abusing her platform at the TwitchCon event to spread anti-Semitic vitriol during this time of intense apprehension for the Jewish community. Twitch must learn from this situation and improve how they address anti-Semitism and hate on their platform, which is an ongoing and significant challenge. We encourage Twitch to make meaningful action, such as collaborating with the platform's Jewish community, providing staff, streamers, and moderators with anti-Semitism training, and updating how they review programming for their live events. We will continue to engage the company to help ensure the platform is a safe, respectable, and inclusive space for all. We will continue to hold them accountable when they fail in that responsibility. So the news goes from, almost a month goes and nothing happens, right? The event itself was fine. Nobody really noticed it at TwitchCon. Everybody had a good time. It wasn't until Ethan Klein started making these videos and claims until it became a problem. And then within 4 days of that, getting the ADL involved. And so we have potentially a CEO resigning. We have Twitch banning streamers. We have the ADL commenting and condemning and really moralizing about how this company should moderate and how it should handle its business, right? Which doesn't happen as often. And so bringing it back to these cycles of antagonism, right? We see Ethan Klein up at the top, and we see Denims and Frogan and some of the others, right? And so this cycle continues, right? But when one streamer or creator has more resources, right, the ability, he's got millions of dollars, he's got the Anti-Defamation League on speed dial, he's got the attention of the CEO and the highest level of employees at the company, right? These cycles of antagonism aren't nearly as equal as this model implies, right? They were much more asymmetrical in terms of power dynamics and who can inflict the most damage on one another. And so to take it back to sponsor, right? So what does these asynchronous interactions look like with chat, right? And so we see Ethan Klein in the middle. He's got calls to action to his initial visit to his initial audience, right? So for initial visibility, he's asking people to record clips, right? So you might be watching rivals, some might call it hate watching or doing surveillance, right? Or stalking, depending on how you want to identify with the word. And so they do this work, they provide the materials, they leave me comments. The secondary visibility audience can do review bombs and, continue to pile in on these meme comments. Whereas Ethan himself has the resources to conduct lawsuits and bring lawsuits and legal action to these streamers who have significantly less resources than himself. But this is not enough, right? So October 21st is when all of these big changes happen. But then on November 15th, Twitch updates its hateful conduct policy and specifically adds Zionist and Zionism as a slur to its list of bannable offenses. And so the part of the quote is, as part of our hateful conduct policy, we prohibit the use of terms that may be harmful or abusive in isolation. but can be used as a slur to denigrate others in certain contexts. In line with that approach, starting today, using the term Zionist to attack or demean another individual or group of people on the basis of their background or religious belief is against our rules. We recognize that Zionist and Zionism also refer to a political movement. Using the term to refer to the political movement, whether in a supportive or critical way, does not violate our hateful conduct policy. Our goal isn't to stifle conversation or criticism of an institution or ideology, but to prevent coded hate directed at individuals and groups of people, which is an escalation, right? They've never updated their hateful conduct to include a counter term for Arabic or Palestinian people, right? Those people are not named in these updates. One side is represented in these changes, right? And so if you see that timeline from September to October to now November, one side of the struggle is able to enact changes at the platform governance level. I'm worried that this audio might not play. It's loading right now, but this is a video clip of the Twitch CEO, Dan Clancy, talking to Twitch Director of Community Marketing, Mary Kish. Their discussion confirms that sponsors and advertisers were squeamish about being paired with political streamers covering sensitive issues. So they're not naming Ethan Klein and Asmongold in these harassment campaigns directly, but they are confirming that since September and October, all of this bad press and publicity has made people nervous, right? I mentioned that Chevron, Dunkin' Donuts, and Capcom were all sponsors on that TwitchCon label where that panel was. All three of them pulled their support for the company, right? Which affected the company's bottom line, which is bad for business, right? And so the company decides that the technical solution to this is that they're going to create a politics and a potentially sensitive issues identification tag. As a streamer, you are supposed to use these and you brand your channel with these, right? And so this allows streamers to designate their content with these tags to potentially avoid more stringent forms of governance. However, these tags are searchable, right? And so if I'm looking for content by, if I'm looking for political content, or if I'm looking for content made by LGBTQ streamers, right? That also creates an interactive database that people can weaponize, right? And so if you're requiring people to label themselves as political and or trans and or Arabic, right? You are signaling people for more harassment, unfortunately. And so this means that streamers who use these tags are sequestered from more commercial and brand-friendly forms of streaming like gaming and esports. So not only are you sequestering yourself and making yourself available for more harassment, but you're also denied the ability to, or denied access to the most profitable parts of Twitch that are sponsored by advertisers. And so let's see if this plays.
Also, we recently launched a new
Can you hear
content
that?
classification label. Okay, we launched a number last year, but we just launched one new one. The reason, but this is both used sometimes for viewers in terms of content that they may not want to see, and then also for advertisers, helping giving them information as they characterize the content that is appropriate for the content. So last month we added a new category for politics and sensitive social issues. Now, just for clarity on this, you can look at the guidelines, but this isn't about a casual mention in the stream. This is for streams that are targeted talking about politics, sensitive social issues, that then you should label it not because you mentioned something at one point in your stream or you have a brief period, but when your stream is primarily about these issues, but please place the label on there, and we appreciate that.
We also want to be clear that you don't need the label if your stream is talking about your lived experience. So when we're talking about politics or sensitive social issues, that sounds really broad, right? And one of the reactions that we got, especially from our Twitch ambassadors, was, well, I talk about sensitive stuff because it's my life. And that doesn't count as something you need to put this label on. So if you're talking about your lived experience, your experiences as a person who's experiencing things, you can go ahead and do that. Politics and sensitive social issues label is required if it's a discussion that is like the focus of your stream. And it's one of the listed topics found in our guidelines. So you can go to the article, it's in our safety center, which is safety.twitch.tv. And there's even an there's like a link as well for content classification guidelines. You can see all the listed topics. But I do think it's important to just remember, like, if this is the focus of your stream, it's probably best to have that label on there. But if you're gaming and you're just talking about your experiences, your lived experiences, you don't need this label.
All right, and now,
All right, they figured it out, right? Like that's it. That's the solution. No more difficulties and no problems that might arise from the segregation that they just developed. I don't know another or nicer word to use in that instance, right? But obviously this becomes an issue, right? Because what if your lived experience is deemed political by another? What if your existence, right? Like, hey, I think trans people deserve to exist. Okay, that's not political. But if a bunch of, if 1,000 white supremacists and misogynists come in and say, no, they don't deserve to exist, you're a bad person, suddenly then that comment becomes political, right? It's not my initial advocacy for inclusion, but the backlash and people's unwillingness to call out this misbehavior, right? Because a difference in political opinion is arguing over something like, oh, I think that this tax should be 5% or maybe 7%, right? Those are issues of politics, not necessarily broader discussions of does this group of people deserve dignity and the ability to exist peacefully. This is also particularly dangerous because these people don't really seem to be that concerned, right? They are not the ones who came up with this initial solution, or they were not the ones who initially came up with the, oh, well, what if my lived experience is deemed political by another, right? They said, oh, our Twitch ambassadors are the one who told us this. So these people did not think that that would be a problem, right? They ultimately thought that these identity tags would be the ultimate solution, and yay, we solved it, and everyone can move on and be happy from this. Which, as most of us know, that's not really how it works. And so let's go and show some more inconsistencies in how Twitch handles politics and sensitive topics. Trigger warning, Asmongold is a racist, Islamophobic asshole, to put it as nicely as I can. The quotes that he used are extremely off-putting. That's in the second middle quote. I'm not going to read the full quote, but it's important. It's in a news article that is already reported. So if you want to read that for yourself, you can. But essentially, he claimed that he did not care about the loss of 42,000 lives. He did not care. He did not feel any empathy or sorry. And he went as far as to say that they were from an inferior culture, which is just an atrocious thing to say. And that's all I can really say about that, because I just can't register in how you don't have empathy. But more problematic than the words that he's saying is how much of a following this person has. As I mentioned earlier, he's currently the most popular political streamer on Twitch, with a combined following of 5.7 million across 2 accounts. And so when he says these things, it spreads extremely quickly. And you can kind of see from the photo, and again, it's not nice to make fun of people's appearances. That's not what I'm trying to do here. But from this photo, you can actually see a lot about the person's bedroom, their level of hygiene, and you can start to make inferences about the type of person that this is. And so when he goes on this rant and says, there is an inferior culture, and he misinterprets, the Islamic faith, and the entire religion, and basically says that Sharia law means that you're allowed to be genocided against. That ultimately got him banned for 14 days. Only 14 days, whereas the Arabic streamers who had the hummus tier list, received a full month suspension, right? And so automatically even though they both violated the hateful conduct policy, this group of people got a 30-day ban, while this person got a 14-day ban. And so already we're seeing inconsistencies in how this is treated. And so there are a lot of clips about Asmongold living in filth. That is part of his personal brand. A lot of people, when they think of gamers, they kind of recall that if you remember the episode of World of Warcraft, or if you remember the South Park episode on World of Warcraft with that very large, very greasy and acne-ridden person in a chair, that's kind of what this person is. A lot of people refer to him online as the Cockroach King or the Incel King. And so he is free in this top left. That is a roach that is crawling on him, right? So if you go onto YouTube, you can search Asmongold roach compilation. And these are so common that people have made YouTube videos of how many times he has interacted with roaches crawling on him while he's on stream, right? In this top right, you can see the hole in his roof, right? And the tweet is Asmongold fell through his rotting ceiling whilst looking for a decomposing animal. Okay. And then in this video in the bottom left, perhaps his most infamous thing is, well, I'm just gonna let him say it.
You did that rat out? I don't need to anymore. It doesn't smell bad. And it would. The thing is, I used to use a dead rat as an alarm clock, actually, for my stream, because basically what happened was, whenever the sun would come up, it would start cooking the corpse of the rat, and then it would start smelling again, and then the smell would wake me up. So I would use the rat effectively as an alarm clock, and as soon as it, it got hot enough, it would wake me up, and then I would know, oh shit. It's time to stream.
Yeah, so that's foul. And this is the person who thinks that one culture is, inferior to another, right? But yeah, so again, I show you this to show the inconsistencies in how these punishments are applied, right? And then again, this happens. Oh, go away. There's more inconsistent enforcement on the other side of the political spectrum, right? And so we have Hasanabi, who's been banned 4 times throughout his career. The first time was in 2019, after he made some controversial remarks about Representative Dan Crenshaw, and then saying that the United States created the conditions that caused 9/11 to happen. And I will play the clip for that. He got a ban for calling white people cracker, and so using cracker as a slur. And so he was banned in 2021 for that, implying where Twitch was implying that cracker carried the same historical and cultural significance of hate and oppression as the N-word, which many disagree with. And then he's been banned twice in 2025. Once for the claim is that he threatened Senator Rick Scott and said that he deserved to be dead, when in reality, the streamer said that he pointed out that when Senator Scott was the CEO of Columbia HCA Healthcare, the company was sued for $1.7 billion in fraud and Medicare fraud. And so in March, we were all talking about Luigi Mangione. And so Hassan was making an offhand joke saying that, if we were really concerned about Medicaid fraud, then they should go after Rick Scott. But people used that to imply that he was saying he should be assassinated. And then finally, he was most recently suspended for covering the recent DC shooters manifesto. And so this is the shooter who assassinated 2 Israeli diplomats outside of the Jewish Museum in New York. And so Hassan covered that as part of his broadcast, as part of the news, as he has done for multiple school shooters, because this is the United States, right? And shooter manifestos are a very common genre of literature at this point. They are objects of newsworthy interest. And so it is telling that Twitch decided to ban this one rather than when he covers a manifesto written by an incel at, a school shooter, right? Those are very different things. And so you can see some of the tweets on the right. He says, yes, it is for exactly what you think it is, anti-white racism for using the term cracker in December 13th, 2021. Absolutely insane that Twitch banned 2 of my mods for using the word cracker. One of us is black and the other is brown. Does Twitch actually believe cracker is a slur? And notably, there's no response from that. But I will play the original clip for you for the 9/11.
So insane. America deserved 9/11, dude. Fuck it. I'm saying it.
We're there to partner with them. We're not there doing our own thing. We're there partnering and training.
In a video
and
game.
and enhancing their capabilities. So that's part of what we're doing. The other part is just knowledge. We want to know what's happening.
Like we fucking totally brought it on ourselves, dude. Holy shit. We did. We fucking did in a video game.
And so, okay, he gets quite animated. He's swearing a lot. He's screaming because he's passionate about what he believes in. But he got in trouble for that, right? He was featured on Fox News a lot, and that has become part of his reputation. It's clipped out of context because there is a larger conversation where he talks about the consequences of US imperialism and the dangers of forever wars in the Middle East. That's not the clip that you see, though. That's not the clip that is ultimately shown on Fox News or in making these decisions on if he should be banned or not, right? Because seeing that is quite controversial, right? Most people would not agree with that, especially that particular phrasing, right? And so that makes it quite complicated. And so these are some of the personalities that are doing news creation on
And
Twitch.
so here we are.
And of course, they are interrelated, right? And so Hassan and Ethan Klein used to be friends. They had a podcast together from 2021 up until October 2023. It ended badly. They had ideological differences, right? Where Hassan was one of the most ardent supporters of Palestinian rights in the United States, whereas Ethan Klein and his wife tend to be much more supportive of the IDF. They did not continue their podcast after that. That started a lot of these hate campaigns. But unfortunately, Hassan is quite popular, right? He knows typically what gets him in trouble. His audience is the one, he doesn't rely on advertising revenue from selling G Fuel or products, right? He relies on user subscriptions and donations from his crowd. So he's not as vulnerable as other content creators, which means that Ethan Klein then decides to go after his supporters, right? Who aren't as famous, who have less resources and support, but are still pro-Palestinian, right? Because to Ethan Klein, pro-Palestine means terrorist. And that needs to be removed from the internet. Like, you cannot voice support for this issue or these people or this culture without being labeled anti-Semitic. And then this escalates into, even more lawsuits where Ethan Klein is trying to inflict as much damage and pain onto these content creators as possible. He developed a video that he called a content nuke with the express purpose of defaming people, of hurting people, misrepresenting their character, and inflicting damage. But this doesn't stop with content creators, right? Because these people are all famous celebrities, right? They are newsworthy people. So internet journalists will cover them quite frequently. And so Ethan Klein is now in the middle of suing, Denims, Frogon, who are both involved in that original Hummusgate panel, as well as another streamer called Caseytron, who all reacted to his content nuke video, right? And so he's saying that because you watched my video, that's a copyright infringement, I'm going to sue you. Most of the community suggests that this is a frivolous lawsuit that is not intended to actually win as a copyright infringement, but it's designed to specifically harass and cause financial pressure on these individuals, right? And so specifically, he's targeting women over men. He's targeting creators and journalists. And so you can see on the left a tweet from Taylor Lorenz, the internet journalist who's written for multiple publications, but she says, Ethan Klein has begun threatening me on Instagram. Here's a screen recording of our exchange. I and other women have asked him repeatedly to stop making sexual comments about us on his Instagram story and orchestrating sexualized, misogynistic online harassment campaigns against us. And then the video goes on, but you can see some of the screenshots of the DMs where Ethan says, provide me a written apology by end of day. If you would like to avoid litigation, go ahead and ask an attorney about your exposure on saying someone, quote, sexually harasses young girls, quote. You are a effing journalist. Jesus Christ, you need to get your S together. She responds with, hi, Ethan, here's a video of you sexually harassing a teenager. Is this a fake video? Please let me know with a link. Then Ethan says, this video is 10 years old. Your claim is that I am currently doing this. Quote, when you stop sexually harassing young girls and read a book, implies active and current, right? So this person does not appear to be in a mentally stable place, right? This person seems to be unraveling, but they have millions of followers. They command so much attention and resources in this online space. And frequently, they are allowed to dictate what is and isn't permissible as a discussion on news and politics, right? And we see how ubiquitous these smear campaigns are, right? It doesn't matter if you're a content creator, it doesn't matter if you're a journalist, it doesn't matter if you're a CEO of the company. If this person has decided that they have taken umbrage with you, you are going to have a really shitty day. Probably more than a day, probably a couple months, to be honest. And so, what does this mean, right? There's a lot going on here. It's a very complicated space. It moves very quickly. Every time there's a new news story, it adds another layer of complication to this, right? So what do we do with all of this? For one thing, political discourse is ill-equipped for ad-based revenue strategies on Twitch, right? Especially as long as the company is unwilling to say, you guys do not get to say that people claiming Palestinians get to exist is political, right? Until the company makes a firm stance, this ad-based revenue model is going to be subject to harassment campaigns, right? Because advertisers, they do not like being called racist. They do not like being labeled as extremists, right? Regardless of what might actually be racist or extreme or not, right? Many would say that saying these people get to exist is not actually extremism, but I don't know, advertisers they cave under pressure, right? So that's not really, it doesn't matter what the reality is if you can get people on your side to do these type of harassment and smear campaigns. And so we also see that these cycles of antagonism are increasingly powerful tools for pressuring platforms. Like we saw with the call to have the CEO resign, which immediately led into these streamers being banned, which then a month later was followed up with, Zionism or Zionist being added to the list of bannable offenses. And so we also see that smear campaigns occur on and offline, right? It's more than just leaving nasty comments on people's, content, right? It's on each of your channels. As we see here, lawsuits are definitely offline harassment. There are also opportunities to harass people and dox their living address. So there's a lot of ways that you can inflict damage on these people. There are some opportunities for resistance, right? Because even though some of the voices tend to be sure, Gold and Ethan Kleiner, two of the most popular creators, they're comfortable with Zionism. That doesn't mean that there are no other voices, right? There are lots of, Hassan is a strong voice and advocator for Palestine, who continues to fight for making sure that we can have these conversations online. People are developing campaigns where they use crowdfunding to kind of insulate themselves from these threats of legal harassment. So that way, not one individual is forced to put up $150,000 to pay a lawyer to sit in court for 6 months. And so there are ways that people can push back against this. Ethan Klein has been losing followers throughout, these 2 years. You see more posts where people claim that I've been a longtime fan for over a decade and I'm, turned off by this recent behavior. It seems like he's mentally unwell and I just want him to get help. So it's tough to see what the end game is, especially with the current presidential administration in the US, right? That's definitely not helping things, but that doesn't mean that people are giving in, right? This sounds bad, but people are punching back, and they're still finding ways to protect themselves and do content creation on these platforms, even though the platforms are not designed for them or they do not necessarily protect them. And since this is all happening like ongoing, right? Literally, as I was finishing up my slides yesterday, this is a tweet from Casey Tron, one of the people who's being sued in Ethan Klein's lawsuit. And so trigger warning, they are discussing potential suicide in the video clip on the next slide. But she talks about, well, she said, it's going to get worse. It's going to get a lot worse and will never get better. He's signaling to his hate audience that he wants to run a lifelong harassment campaign against me and likely hinting that I should kill myself. And this has happened, right? They have enough followers to organize, when something terrible happens to your family in the US, right, or someone's sick, a lot of times people will do like a meal train, right, where the community will organize together and they try to support you and provide you with resources, maybe like casseroles or dinners, so you do not have to worry about cooking while you're going through this terrible moment, right? But for these hate creators, you can see that instead of doing something where, we're going to use our community to nourish and empower people and support them through terrible times, we're going to try to, organize these constant ongoing hate campaigns with the express goal of trying to get them to, as they say online, unalive themselves. And so this is what we are fighting against, right? This is why it is important to continue calling out this behavior, because this cannot stand, right? We can contribute on GoFundMe and these crowd supporting campaigns as much as we want, but that's not going to stop these issues from happening. We really need platforms to get more directly involved and say you do not get to like target individuals like this. And then we got one more. Am I done? Oh, no, that's the last slide. But yeah, I think that is, yeah, that's an hour and 15 minutes. So I think we can do some Q&A for those who are still here.
Thank you so much, Brendan. That was really detailed and so illuminating. And we have a few questions in the chat. I have a few questions. If other folks have questions, please add them in the chat. We'll try to get to them. Let me go over some of the questions that we have in the chat. Also, unfortunately, some of the audio was cutting out. So if folks want Brendan to repeat anything, please put a request in the chat as well. So the first question is about Twitch audience. And if you could give a bit of an overview of what sector of the US and global populations are predominantly on Twitch, just wanting to kind of understand the terrain.
Absolutely. So Twitch is a global platform. It really started with the esports community in like 2014. And so that was extremely popular in the US, Europe, and parts of Asia. Since then, it has grown quite tremendously. And so it is most popular in the traditional global north. It's not quite the most popular in the world because in Asia, and like China has live streaming apps like Douyin as well. And there's a couple others in Japan that are more popular within those specific regions. But with English speaking audiences, Twitch tends to be the most popular one in the world. For esports, it's one of the most popular in the world, and then it kind of varies depending on the category. But there are very prominent, because they do TwitchCons, they do TwitchCon Europe, they do TwitchCon Latin America, they do TwitchCon Asia. So they are actively attempting to be the largest live streaming platform in the world in terms of user generated content. I don't know exactly how you compare. It doesn't quite compare directly with Netflix and Spotify.
That makes a lot of sense. Another question from the chat is from our director, Maya, who wrote that I'm struck by how huge and also sort of autonomous this space is, and how do you think it interacts with offline political power?
That, I think, is a fantastic question because we are just starting to see that happening. So I mentioned that we were writing this, our first articles back in like pre-COVID, right? And so most of these streamers were not necessarily household names at that point. Probably extremely popular with children and extremely online people, but not really recognized or known outside of those circles. Whereas in this most recent political election in the United States, streamers were everywhere. They were important because you saw for Donald Trump's campaign, he met with a lot of podcasters. So people like Aiden Ross was a streamer who was on Kick, which he's not, I don't even get into him, but he's another misogynistic, delightful person who was quite prominent in the Trump campaign or doing appearances and trying to get some of that younger audiences. Whereas for people like Hassan, he's been quite active in streaming from police protests. So he lives in Los Angeles. There's been a ton of anti-ICE protests. There's been a bunch of when they did the student campus encampments. Was that 2023 or 2024? I think both. But he went out to UCLA and USC to participate in those, where he brought his broadcast directly to those events where you could really see he's doing journalism in the field. Whereas typically I have seen for conservatives, there has not been as much like, I'm going to take myself directly to the news. I will continue reacting to the news. And so I think that Hassan is a bit unique in that aspect. But we also saw instances where, you can look up Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has done events with Twitch streamers like Hassan and some other folks. Tim Walz did a campaign stop with Hassan and some other folks. And so, and then Hassan was also invited to the recent DNC convention. He got kicked out because I don't know exactly what he did. I think he was being too critical. He said he was being too critical and he got kicked out. But so to your question, how does it interact with offline political power? I think offline political power is trying to figure out how to take advantage of these spaces. The problem is, as you saw from some of the clips, right? Audiences on Twitch want their streamers to give them the unfiltered truth, right? For them, that's what authentic means. I want to hear you say, F the government, I'm mad at this, right? They want to hear that rage, that whether it's, from a conservative or from a liberal perspective as well. And so I don't think that necessarily meshes well with traditional offline power structures. But these streamers and celebrities are being recognized as really important places to court audiences, specifically if you're trying to get elected by people under the age of 30. And so I think we are going to continue to see them being an important space in politics in the future.
Right, absolutely. I want to ask you a little bit more about resistance, which you started talking about, but something that I was struck by is your kind of formulation that it's the backlash that actually shapes policy, not the original content itself. And I think the Ethan Klein example is really an excellent illustration of that, because in my kind of understanding of what happened is the incident and the outrage to it was largely manufactured. he was made fun of, his feelings maybe got hurt, but the response became so disproportionate and included stalking, surveillance, harassment campaigns, as you mentioned, lawsuit, pressure on the platform, resulting in real policy and moderation changes. So and kind of the involvement of the ADL in the entire incident, I think, is really telling. And so I wonder how we can build defenses, or what are some other models that actually can protect these streamers, or maybe take some of the influence and power away from these manufactured outrage cycles.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question, because streamers are really good at developing tactics to put band-aids on solutions. So I mentioned that things like hate raids were really popular, in 2021 through 2024, where you get 1,000 people that come up and they start trying to spam the N-word in your audience, right? Or or other terrible frames. And so the community did develop their own solutions outside of Twitch of like, okay, what kind of tools do we need? And so they met with, community software developers to figure out like, okay, here's like a GitHub tool that we can use that, automatically bans people more efficiently, right? And so they're very good at like recognizing, okay, Twitch is not going to solve this problem for me. I can't stop the problem from happening, but here's a tactic to kind of stem the flow a bit. And so they're going to continue doing that, right? Because that's just how you continue to do this job from a day-to-day basis. But if you really want to stop the problem from happening, there needs to be a platform-driven solution to stop this, right? There needs to be a conversation that says, listen, you do not just get to say that, like, they're talking about hummus. They're not talking, this is not anti-Semitic. This is not like, that you need a platform executive to watch more than a 30-second clip of what happened. And, if you're gonna do, having this surface level claim of diversity and inclusion, look, we let the Arab streamers have a panel at TwitchCon, right? None of the executives attended. Right. And because if they had attended and seen that, they could have said, hey, Ethan, like, I was there. It wasn't really that bad. Like, I'm sorry that your feelings got hurt, but like, that's not what happened. So, whether you want, I don't think that Twitch executives are going to be the ones that say, here's the definition of Zionism and when it becomes hurtful and when it becomes a slur, right? That's probably not going to be what they do. But something as simple as just being there for the event, especially because this actually happened at the convention, right? There's no way that you're going to be able to have a Twitch employee watch every single streamer every single day. That's not going to happen. You probably could hire employees to monitor the top 100. That's not too outlandish, right? To kind of, okay, you are our Hassan moderation employer. You are our Ethan Klein moderator, right? So you're going to be the one that we call on to say what happened so we don't have to rely on these 30-second clips, which I think would be a more feasible and more cheap solution, because ideally, in my world, in my most ideal and optimistic dreams or delusions, we would see platforms actually create a shared set of terms of service and a shared ban list. And so that way you can actually do something about this, because even if Twitch bans Asmongold, right, there's still a revolving door. So like, okay, he's just going to go to YouTube or Twitter and continue making content. So even though you've made it a problem that you are no longer legally responsible for Twitch, you still have this monster that is doing this type of damage, right? And so that there still needs to be something done about this. He's still able to cause damage to your employees and Twitch streamers as well. So that is something that I would like to see as a more permanent solution. But I think that would require significant political reform. And I do not think that's going to happen anytime soon. It's something that I would like to advocate for throughout my career, because I think that's one of the only ways that we can really not guarantee, because you can never guarantee safety, but like that would be a meaningful step.
Right. Last thing I want to ask you is, have you actually noticed how this new policy, these new moderation standards, the inclusion of Zionists in the list of bannable offenses, kind of the declaration that Zionist is somehow a racial slur, and also I think this kind of absurd reversal of the feminist tenet that personal is political, the personal is not political, kind of attempt to designate policy. How did it actually change what you were seeing on Twitch?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because it's extremely messy. We've been talking about Frodon, and her family is, I believe she's Lebanese, but she has family throughout the Middle Eastern region. And there was a clip that someone recorded of her. Of course, it's always a single clip where, she was extremely frustrated, and she said something to the effect that, I hope that all American soldiers get PTSD. And she followed up by saying, well, the ones who recognize that they did war crimes, I don't want you to have PTSD, but like if you're valorizing that, and if you think that you were liberating my people, no. And so that's her lived experience, right? But then also deemed a political statement. And so she was not banned for that. We will give Twitch credit for that, right? Like they claimed in that video clip that, hey, if you are talking about your lived experience, that's not a political statement. And so she got a lot of harassment and hatred for, saying that. And so there is sometimes they're consistent, sometimes they're inconsistent. It really seems like it just depends on which Twitch employee is monitoring the situation that day, to be honest, but they are anonymous, so you can't really keep track of that either. And so it's really tough. We see different terms added to these lists. We see that, and every time, because, for these groups, right, they're taking screenshots, they're posting subreddits where they're doing mega threads to keep track of these conversations, right? And so if someone is successful in getting Twitch to cave to these pressure campaigns, that is recorded. And then that is noted, and then people are going to expand on that in the future. So I do not, I can't tell what terms are going to be added in the future, but it kind of depends on the harassment campaigns that, result, or how they negotiate that.
Thank you so much, Brendan. That was such an interesting and detailed and powerful conversation. And we're so grateful that you could guide us through this really messy world of live streaming. Thank you to everyone in the audience. We're gonna stop recording and end the meeting momentarily, but it will be posted online within the next few days. And we hope to see you all at our next events. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And if anybody has any other questions and wants to reach out